I want, on behalf of our party, to speak up for and support and encourage the people of Cork, Galway, Waterford and Limerick to agree to the proposal of having a directly elected mayor. And I deeply regret that we're not adding the people of Dublin to that list. I think it's a real missed opportunity, and while there is a convention coming, a citizens' convention, which I think should include, to answer one of the questions the Minister asks in his opening statement, that convention should include elected representatives, because we have experience of local government, most of us, which can usually add to that convention or assembly. Can I make just a couple of broad points to explain why we are so supportive of the concept of directly elected mayors? I was last night at an event, a Women for Election event, and I reflected that in the depth of our crisis about 10 years ago, rightly there was a whole range of different movements that rose up to look to change our democracy and to change the way we do things. And some of those have been delivered on, the likes of having gender quotas for people in Parliament, or to run for Parliament, I think have been hugely beneficial. The provisions that the Green Party originally wrote and then the subsequent government, in fairness to them, implemented to take corporate donations out of Irish politics is another example of how we've changed the nature of politics. But one of the biggest opportunities, well, there are various, I would put at the door of Fine Gael and Labour in that time of government. One was the wrong property tax being picked rather than the site value tax, or property tax as an example. But the other biggest failing, I think, or one of the biggest failings in terms of reforming the way we do politics, has been the failure to follow through in strengthening local government. And I think, I suppose I'm very kind of particularly bitter about, in the sense that in that time in government, when we were in government, we introduced legislation for the introduction of a directly elected mayor in Dublin. It had been right through the parliamentary process. I think it was at fourth stage in the report stage in the Seanad when we ran out of room and that government fell. And we were that close to achieving the objective of having a directly elected mayor for Dublin. So I think the government needs to rectify that, and I hope the people will direct towards us having a real strengthening of local government by supporting the plebiscites. I think for Cork, Galway, Waterford, Limerick, it's particularly important because we need to counterbalance the growing influence or excess influence of Dublin as a centre of development of this country. We need to see strong cities in our other cities to balance development much more effectively. And that's not to do down Dublin. I think there was an interesting conference I was at down in Cork where the analysis was shown, clear, researched, that the development of second and third and fourth cities tends to strengthen in capital. It's not one versus the other. And I believe that will be best achieved by the people of Cork, Waterford, Limerick, Galway, starting to develop their cities in a far more creative, careful, intelligent way. No one could look at the development of those cities over the last 30, 40 years and not surmise that the current system is fatally flawed. In terms of, if you look at key issues, the responsibilities of what a directly elected mayor would be, to help coordinate not the individual planning decisions. I agree with the Minister's comment in his statement that we don't necessarily have to make them in taking individual planning decisions, but the broad planning of the city, the broad task we have of turning around Cork, which has gone, I mean, this fantastic city with incredible Victorian and other heritage in the centre, Georgian heritage, has seen over the last 30, 40 years just a sprawl, a hollowing out of the centre of Cork. And that's because of lack of leadership, lack of coordination between the City Council, lack of any real vision for how Cork might develop as a city. And that needs to change, and I think that needs local political leadership to really make it happen. And you get the same for each of the cities. In Limerick, I believe within the historic core area of the city, there's only 3% of the population living there. And again, a fantastic Georgian city, amazing location on the Shannon, and it too has seen this sprawl out around, typically on motorway networks, where it's just leading to gridlock. It's not It hasn't facilitated the development of public transport. It hasn't facilitated the development of high-quality new housing close to where people work and want to live, and schools. So that has to change. The same, Galway is probably the worst example in terms of a city where everyone seems to live on one side and then travel across the city to work on the other, where it's a motorist hell because we just built the city of roundabouts rather than city of tribes. And that has to change. And I don't believe a civil servant or a chief executive who have all the powers at the moment really have the mandate to achieve the scale of change that we need. And similarly, Waterford. Waterford can and should be, and must be, Minister, this may be contentious for you as a Kilkenny man, but in my mind Waterford needs to be the capital of the South East and needs to be really promoted. Huh? Good. But for that to happen, and that doesn't do down Kilkenny or Wexford, in the same way the analogy is that Cork Rising won't do down Dublin, Waterford Rising will help the South East. Like the South East is on, I mean, Deputy Wallace, Wexford is one of the poorest counties in this country. What's going on that with a country with such good land, with such a tradition of engineering and enterprise, I always put it down to the fact, I think 1798, the Brits put it down and they decided they're going to keep it down ever since.
The land is owned by very few people. If you want
that could be the case. But this is the issue, because I think the direct elected mayor for Waterford is actually going to be important for the South East. Like Waterford needs to go from being, to double in size, if not treble. And Cork and Waterford and Limerick the same. How do we do that? Who do we trust to manage that? And I believe we should trust our democratic system, trust our people, because they will vote for who the people would be, the men or women, that will take on this huge task we have to turn Cork into a city of 500,000, in the city, living in the centre, turn Limerick into a city of 250,000, as was envisaged in the Buchanan report and then abandoned over the last 50 years. The current system is not working, has not worked, needs to change. So I broadly agree with the proposal that the relationship between the new direct elected mayor and the chief executive would be akin between the minister and the chief secretary general and department. I think that makes sense. I agree with the proposal that we should stitch them into the existing system by making the chairs of the various strategic planning committees, the current kind of corporate policy group, into effectively a cabinet. So that's an easy way of the current system evolving to this approach. I think it also adds on, we should be looking at the same time to strengthen, which we all know if we worked as a councillor, that it's the kind of the local area committee type system work. So strengthen that at the same time, as well as the corporate head. I believe the powers should be not just in transport and planning where they're key, but also there's a whole area in terms of enterprise development, in culture, in environment, I mean, I'd like to see a strengthen local government into education and policing and healthcare and really empowering local government. But I think that will happen better when faith in local government is returned, and I think faith in politics comes from people having the ability, if they're not liking the way the city's been run and developed, to get rid of the mayor, to change the leader. And the current system where we've just handing over a chain every year in a completely phony kind of exercise that the real powers is there, which is deeply unfair to the councillors and to the people who do sit into the office of mayors, because my experience in Dublin and elsewhere is you're only just getting to grips with it, you're starting to understand the scale of the job, and then suddenly you're out. It's someone else's turn next year. It's a completely flawed, failed system. Moving and being brave in terms of adopting a different system, I believe, is the right way to go. I think it needs to be done in tandem with other elements, and I said we had a climate committee meeting yesterday when we're considering this real challenge for us as a country, how we develop. And I acknowledge there that I think some of the initiatives recently, the Regional Development Fund, the Rural Development Fund, Urban Development Fund, and indeed the Climate Fund, which is designed to be, rather than the system deciding everything, centrally in the Department of Finance or the Department of Local Government down in Custom House, that far better for us to provide funding to allow local authorities or other institutions to bid in to do urban regeneration projects, rural development projects. And those projects that work best, then you replicate to other parts of the country. So I think, and in those circumstances where there's a significant pot of money for cities to compete, so the best project wins, that will encourage the sort of expertise and planning thinking within local authorities that could really then help it flourish. But Mayor, lastly, and I'd be keen in your roundup to hear when this convention for Dublin is to take place. Because to be honest, I've mentioned all 4 other cities. My city is probably in greatest need for new leadership because the current system is in Dublin really broken. We're facing gridlock in our city. We have really an ability to develop we're still widening every approach road to Dublin. The greatest lunacy possible in transport and planning is happening under the current system. We need a mayor for Dublin. We need that plebiscite or that convention to finish and Dublin also have its plebiscite and be able, not in 5 years' time, but as soon as that convention is done and the people are consulted, that we in Dublin too deserve the right to have our mayor to say how our city should grow from here. Thank you.